We're back in session this morning. We're in the Committee of the Whole. When we left off, we had the Department of Revenue and Taxation Director here. And next to ask questions was going to be Senator Muña and then Senator Morrison. The director's not here this morning, but Senator Muña, you have the floor if there's something.
Madam Chair, I believe I had the floor before we adjourned yesterday.
Okay. Okay. Senator Stevis, would you like to?
Thank you. Yes. When we left off, Madam Chair, I was discussing my concerns with the lack of definitions, at least in statute, with regards to what we would be increasing taxes on based on the proposal, which is a proposal to increase taxes on improvements. Now, again, my concern was what the definitions of improvement was, and the law is explicit that it's buildings and permanent, excuse me, and permanent structures, but the law did not further define what a building was and what a permanent structure was. I had requested legal counsel to do a little bit of research into it, and I'd like at this time, I think before moving forward, to satiate my question, if legal counsel could perhaps maybe share the information that she was able to come up with and the unanswered questions with the body. So I'd like at this time to call.
Have you discussed that with her?
I believe so, yes.
All right, are you satisfied?
I'm satisfied with the response and the answers, and I would just like, I think she would be better equipped to explain that to the body.
All right, I also believe that the director had promised to research if there were any rulings that they had made and send you those, so that would be the precedent as to the definition, right?
Correct. Though I still did pose the question to legal counsel, and I think at least based on the time and effort spent on it, I think the information should be shared with the bodies for our consumption and consideration in the proposal.
Is there any objection to that motion? If not.
Madam Chair, please repeat the motion.
All right. Senator Stevis, would you, is it all right if we have a recess and and council's able to discuss that freely with the members?
Yes, I'd be fine with that.
Thank you. We'll have a 2-minute recess. All right. We're back on the record. Senator Esteves, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want the information shared with my colleagues, and that information was that at least based on the cursory research done, nowhere in statute are permanent structures defined. Now we're talking about increasing a tax on improvements, and improvements as defined in the law, specifically under the levy, is buildings and permanent structures. So my concern has been, without a proper definition of permanent structures, has the tax been applied properly? And with that, I think it's also important that if the tax hasn't been applied properly, if we were considering a vote to increase the tax based on improvements, then it can affect what the projected revenues are. It could potentially be higher or it can be potentially lower, depending on what the definitions are and how it's actually been applied based on the law. And so that's been my concern with moving forward, Madam Chair, is my individual concern in raising taxes is the tax being applied correctly based on the law? Because I think we've heard a lot of different things in here on how it's applied, but we just haven't found anything concrete or in writing. And I think it's an important question before moving forward and considering an increasing the tax on something that we're not even clear what it is. I think that's kind of the gist of the argument. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Muñoz?
Thank you. It's actually a good discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, I wanted to bring up a question to Mr. Camacho, and because he's not here, then I'll just pull that back. But I think since we're in this discussion now of land, property, and what's an improvement, just a little bit of my experience being in the appraisal business before. Vacant land is vacant land, and anything you put on it, whether anything, is considered an improvement. The way I remember going out and doing some inspections on some property, we either have a value for land and a value for anything that you put on it, whether it be permanent or not. So for example, there's a house, and whether it's outside kitchen or something, whether it's attached to the property or not, is still considered an improvement. So we would value the home, then we would value everything that's around it, whether it be a carport, whether it be an outside kitchen, whether it be even a doghouse, something similar to that. But anything you put on a vacant land is considered an improvement. That's the way I understand it. And which will, in turn, add to the value of the property total. So I'm not sure how that explanation can allude to Fernando's concerns. But I do know that anything that you put on a vacant land is considered an improvement. But yesterday, what I really wanted to ask Mr. Camacho, and maybe the mover of the amendment can help me understand. I know, Madam Chair, you had brought up to remove the word appraised and also the words as certified by the Board of Equalization. I'm not sure if that's still on the floor. Are we still considering the removal of those words in this amendment?
After you and after Senator Morrison, I think Speaker Cruz would like to have the floor to he has another amendment that's been passed out.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to ask.
All right, thank you very much. Senator, Speaker Cruz, you are recognized.
Okay, I want to thank the previous speaker for the question that was posed. I did take into account her concern and your concern, Madam Chair. And so before you is another amendment where I'd leave section 24-103 intact as is A, except to amend at the end, rather than deposited in the general fund, it's deposited in the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund. And then I add a new subsection B to 24-103, which reads, in addition to the levy in subsection A, there is hereby levied an improvement on all land, property, using again the way that it has up on top. the land property in Guam with a value of $1 million, a yearly tax at the rate of 7/18 of the value thereon. Such tax shall be assessed and collected in the manner prescribed in this chapter. All proceeds derived by the government under any provision of this chapter shall be deposited in the Territorial Education Fund. And I know the first sentence is a little awkward, but I didn't want to change any of the words in subsection A.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, then are you proposing this motion amendment and withdrawing the earlier one?
I thought I'm sorry, if I didn't, I want to withdraw the earlier one and in its place try this one, hoping that it'll assuage your concern, which is very well taken, and make it clear that this is, besides A, there is this B, the subsection B tax that's going to be levied.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the Speaker Cruz's amendment, Senator Espada.
No, I believe it would be on the motion to withdraw. That would be the first item to dispense with, and then we go on to the amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair. He made a motion to withdraw in essence, and again, I think...
Is there an objection to
Thank you.
the motion to withdraw? No. All right, so we're on the amendment.
Not right now.
I mean the motion.
Not right now, thank you.
On the motion, Senator St. Augustine.
I'm just curious, how much funds, taxes would that generate?
Yesterday, the amount was $8 million estimated. On the Speaker Cruz amendment, is there anyone who would like to speak? If not, then let's vote on Senator Espada.
Thank you. What's in existing law right now is that a yearly tax at the rate of 7/72% of the value thereon and 7/18% of the value of the improvements thereon. I'm not sure what the distinction is between, because in the new section, and there's section B that's being proposed, it's still 7/18. What's the, if we didn't put this in, even the $1 million homes or the $1 million improvements that we're talking about would still be subject to subsection A, which is an existing law right now. So there's no change in the tax rate. So I'm just trying to figure out, am I missing something?
Yeah, if you look at subsection B, after 1 million, it says a yearly tax in addition to the levy in subsection A.
Oh, I don't have that on my, let me, did I get that? Sorry. I don't have that on the
sorry.
amendment.
Okay, I'm looking at the wrong version. So on the beginning of subsection B, it says in addition to the levy in subsection
Oh, okay,
A.
there it is. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right. The total of 7/9. On Speaker Cruz's amendment, Senator St. Nicholas? On Speaker Cruz's amendment, if there's no, Senator St. Augustine, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, which amendment are we talking about? Is it the one that doesn't have a name on top that says Senator proposing amendment?
That's what it looks like. And subsection B should be all underlined and begin with the words in addition to the levy.
In addition to the levy. I just would propose that the $1 million be reduced to at least 250 or 500,000. $1 million is a lot of improvement. That's already an industry of its own, commercial industry.
Which, are you making a motion, an amendment?
Yes.
All right, which number?
It's where it has, there's no line here, so where they got the $1 million,
Yes.
bring it to 250,000.
All right, on the amendment to the amendment, he's making a motion to amend 1 million to 250,000. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Exemptions?
To the previous argument that I had stated, even with a property with an improvement of $1 million, these are not McMansions. These are apartment complex where some of our poorest stay. When you reduce that, that not only increases how many apartments are going to be affected, but now it's going to start affecting homes of people, depending on where they are. And considering the increase in construction costs, it doesn't take much at all to break that $250,000 threshold in terms of the value of improvements, of which still hasn't been properly defined. And so I have to object to this amendment. Madam Chair, I think we're not looking at the consequences of this as it relates to our budget by passing it, an increase in all of our government of Guam rent, and how once we we force the market to increase their rates, then it's going to translate to all property. So even at $1 million, once the rates go up, because it's not based on value of the property, they're going to base it on how many rooms there are available, comparables. And so you're going to have businesses that don't need to raise their rate to meet the tax obligation, raising their rates. So for the same reasons, I'm opposed to the $1 million threshold. I'm opposed to the reduction.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. On the San Augustine amendment, Senator Torres, you are recognized.
Madam Chair, I rise in support of the amendment. What we're looking at is an adjustment on improvements. And if you consider that on Guam, an affordable home for a moderate income household is estimated at $250,000 to $290,000. And this moderate income household would be an income household that earns $60,000 per annum. An upper moderate income home would be a person with an upper moderate income with a household income of about $80,000 would qualify for a home valued at $300,000 to $350,000. So the amendment is actually addressing what would be a typical home, affordable home for a moderate income family. And it is not, when we're thinking about the goal here, which is to update real property taxes, which most people who have testified in various public hearings have recognized to be very low, unreasonably low. And an upward adjustment is not an unreasonable thing to ask in terms of real property on Guam. And I believe what we're trying to do too is we're trying to look at a revenue stream that would be less impactful generally across the community. And most people have testified with regard to real property tax that would be an acceptable and reasonable tax to consider. So going back to the amendment of including households that are valued at or improvements at $250,000, that would not impact so negatively a home which is a home owned by a moderate income family earning $60,000. It actually is, in my opinion, reasonable for the standard, because the income that the tax that we're talking about is considered by most to be so nominal. And it also includes, that real property tax also includes the exemptions, such as the first home buyer. I believe there's a first home buyer exemption. I don't know the exact parameters of that. And then there's exemptions for senior citizens and for disabled people too. So those people who would be most adversely affected are already exempt or have an exemption that they can claim, or a combination of exemptions that they can claim. So I rise in support of the amendment. I think that we have a difficult task of trying to balance a budget, and I think most people in our community recognize that where we all have to make the sacrifices and contribute in parity would not be an insurmountable thing to ask of all of us at this time. So I rise in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Torres. On the amendment, is there anyone else who would like to speak? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment to the amendment will basically result in a tax on improvements, a real property tax on improvements for anything valued at $250,000 or above. In light of the conversation that we had yesterday with the amounts that are available for collection, the 73 million, and in line of some amendments that I'm going to be proffering subsequent to the conversation on this one, I'm not comfortable raising taxes on households at this time. I'm also not comfortable doing so even for improvements valued at $250,000, particularly because we have people who may be living in these homes, and yes, you're living in a $250,000 home, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a cash flow that's not going to be impacted by tax increases. What comes to my mind, Madam Chairman, are our senior citizens, some of whom have owned these homes for many, many years, and they've appreciated in value. They're living on Social Security, or they're living on a fixed income, an annuity, and these tax increases on the improvements are going to be cutting into our elderly people, and their fixed income and their cost of living is going to be impacted. And what I always try to do whenever I evaluate any kind of tax policy is I try to look at it from the perspective, are we going to be impacting the cost of living on our people? A hotel occupancy tax, not necessarily, unless you're planning on staying in some rooms on a regular basis. But a property tax, absolutely. That is absolutely a tax that will increase the cost of living on our people. At the $1 million level, depending on how that property tax passes through on rents, it definitely can have an impact. But at the $250,000 level, it will absolutely have an impact. We've had significant price appreciation over these last 20 years. When I first got my little house on the prairie, it was appraised at 112, and now it's appraised about 190, and that was just appreciation of the last 15 years. It wouldn't be impacted by this tax, but other houses of a more substantial nature that live nearby, they would be, and those homes haven't been improved; they've just appreciated, and so I'm just concerned about any tax that's going to impact the cost of living, particularly for our people who live on a fixed income, most notably our senior citizens who are just barely getting by in an environment that constantly sees the cost of living going up. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nicholas. Senator Muña, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have some concerns about reducing it down to $250,000 because I think the whole purpose of this amendment was to address a certain class, $1 million and above. That's the way I understand it. And the previous speaker before talked about it now affecting apartment complexes, which in turn will affect maybe an average class of people who their average incomes. And I have a little issue with that concern only because people who own apartment complexes adjust their rent based on market. So, for example, if the market is high, then the rent, especially where your location is, the rent is a little bit higher. If no one rents your apartment, then they're going to reduce the rent. So it really depends on the market. So they will have a certain level of, the way I understand it, they have a certain level of profit, right? So they're going to make something off of it. If they're not making anything off of it, then they're going to reduce their rent. That's the way I understand it. So to say that this $1 million prior to the amendment, is going to affect the people who rent, I think it's hard to just focus on that. But I feel like when you lower it down to 250, now this starts to affect single family residences, because I think the average home now is about 250. So then it would be defeating, the way I understand it, would be defeating the purpose of affecting a different class of people who can probably afford to pay a little bit more real property taxes at $1 million. So I'm going to go ahead and I would oppose to the reducing it to 250 and be more comfortable maybe with maybe $500,000. But I oppose. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Munoz. Senator Castro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the previous speaker's credit, I too stand in opposition to the amendment. He referenced having a fixed income, and to increase the tax would mean we would have a fixed commitment to make additional payments on an annual basis. Unlike the sales tax that this body undid, that we undid, you can at least opt to determine what you want to buy, cheaper brand, if you can even buy it at all. Unlike that, the second issue, the second reservation I have, Madam Chair, is I think we're inconsistent based on what I heard yesterday in terms of the definition of improvements. On one hand, in an offline discussion, I heard members of the body give their opinion about what an improvement is, but then in the hall, I heard from a subject matter expert in another agency what their applied definition of an improvement is. And if we're not quite clear on what an improvement is, it can affect anything. It could affect the livable space, it can affect the concrete lanai that you had, and until we have a clear definition of improvements and on what that annual impact could be upon a family, I'm very uncomfortable with the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I too would like to object to this amendment, although I do not support the amendment in its entirety. I think one thing that we need to recognize is what has transpired over the course of the last 5, 10, even plus years. What we're seeing is a migration of children going back to residing with their parents because Guam is just getting too expensive. So in situations like this, when you have a parent welcoming back a child, whether only primarily because of expenses that are just getting a little bit too high and they want to provide an extension or two so that they can accommodate their children, now we're saying we're going to assess an additional tax on your family so that you can take care of your family. It doesn't make any sense. Literally. And you know what really compounds this whole situation, Madam Chair, is I was at a business establishment yesterday, and a very good friend of mine, for the first time, told me that he's relocating in January. And this is a middle-income individual. He said he's relocating, and guess why? Because the cost of living in Guam is just getting too high. This government has no business increasing the cost of living here on island. And that's why in situations like this, it would be a discouragement. As a matter of fact, it would take more money out of the families, the primary homeowners' pocketbooks, rather than investing it in providing appropriate and sufficient accommodations for some of the children who just want to come back for a temporary basis so that they can have sufficient accommodations or finances to decide what they're going to do. And I hope that by virtue of the decisions that are being made, that it's not to accommodate, provide temporary accommodations so that eventually they ultimately decide to move off island. We've got to stop increasing, at least the government of Guam has got to stop looking at our people and our businesses first and foremost to be able to increase or to provide additional funding to continue the operations of this government the way it is today. So I object to this particular amendment, and I think it's really, from my perspective, it's traditional family. Because traditionally, you always, as parents and as grandparents, you always try, you don't necessarily want to bring your children back home, but if they're having a hard time making ends meet because they're providing for their children, they're paying for their auto bills, they're paying for their at least their rent, and the rent keeps going up, then sometimes our people and our family members have no other option but to go back to the home front, or even siblings, to invite other siblings to assist. And in most cases, we want to anticipate to assist temporarily, whether it's for a year or a couple years. So, Madam Speaker, I just don't think that we need to, first of all, reduce the threshold. I was looking at a $250,000 home, a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, and a carport. That's a reasonable home for a single family. And now we're saying if you want to expand and accommodate, in situations like myself, your wife's request to expand the garage, you know, it's going to cost a little bit more, rather than taking that extra money and putting in sufficient spacing and accommodating the needs of the family. I think our people should spend their own money, not this government taking money from them to spend it for them. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Uggan. On the San Augustine amendment, is there any other discussion? Senator San Augustine, you may close.
No, Madam Speaker, I will withdraw my amendment. I would just hope that as we pursue this budget, if we want to talk about streamline, then somebody introduce something that's going to streamline the government. If we want to talk about saving the families that only make so much, then somebody please introduce something that will help the families out there. Because if we want to talk about property, I bought my house for $157,000. It won't impact me at $250,000. Maybe for some folks, maybe at $500,000 impact, because most of the folks that have bought homes in my area, in Jigo, the price of homes up there are $385,000. So if we want to talk about some rate, if my colleagues want to stick to $1 million, then so be it. Thank you.
All right, so the amendment is there any objection to the amendment being withdrawn? If not, Senator San Augustine, you still have the floor on Speaker Cruz's amendment. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on Speaker Cruz's amendment that's before you? Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is I'm not sure which way we're going, but this is really a tough balancing act. You know, we do have a very strong, ever-increasing mandate before us, and that is to provide a child with an adequate education. I think we all understand the 14 points that we all know will continue to increase in value, because we all want to see state-of-the-art institutions for our children. But if you look at the school systems out here, they're stagnant. They're not seeing the major improvements that we really need to see in our schools. And if you look at this amendment, Madam Chair, it's tough for us trying to balance this, because we just yanked $23 million out of the budget, and now we're trying to recover and restore that back into the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, which in a large part supports our educational system. So we need to figure out and examine these mandates and understand making the message very clear to our people, you know, what we're trying to balance here. I mean, do we really want to take our school system to the next level and provide not just an adequate education, but facilities that are state-of-the-art and that meet the needs of this ever increasing and changing times. I'm looking at the amendment, Madam Chair, and the author has made the change, and I'm glad he specifies or spells out where this money shall be deposited, and that's to be very clear to our community that, you know, this that we're trying to address here is will assist our Department of Education. And I think, you know, the message just needs to be balanced here and provided in our community so that it doesn't look like we're just trying to throw or increase taxes for this government. We want people to also to know that where it's going. And I think, you know, not to bring back the sales tax, but I think the previous speaker brought it up. It made it very clear that the people could decide or actually would know exactly what the government be not only getting, but also know where it will be going. And I think when we look at this amendment, we will know where it's going, and it has a direct impact or support to our education system. I do hope when we start discussing increases that we make it very clear to our people where we're earmarking these funds, so people know we're just not trying to bloat this government, or, you know, there is there is demand out in our community, not only for our hospital. They want to see our hospital improved, but they also want to see our school system improve. And I think we're, you know, it's tough to ask our community to you know, a little bit to support where we want to see our schools to be, but I hope that we make that message very clear, that it's going to cost, make it very clear, it's going to cost more money to make these schools or meet the demands of our community, where they want these schools, or at least meet the demands of providing a child with an adequate education. So I'm hoping when we look at these amendments, we spell out what it says, and I thank the author for exactly what I saw in other measures and where monies will be going and what it will be supporting. Yes, we don't want to increase taxes. I mean, I just hope there's options here, more options here to look at. But you know, I thank the author for making the attempt to see and adjust this amendment. So I support the amendment, Madam Chair. I understand there's always, everyone's timid and worried to increase taxes, but I think if we make it clear to our people, you know, that where this is going to our education system, I think that there'll be some folks out there that have some understanding that, you know, that's what we're attempting to do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. On the Speaker Cruz amendment, is there any other speaker? Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, I heard a very impassioned statement that came from a member of this body that said, then why did you find ways to cut, areas to cut? Why don't we look at where we need to prioritize the funding of this government? Why don't we look at Public Law 34-87 and we just start from there? Start from the top, from education, funding it, from public safety, funding that, from public health, funding that. And then guess what? The other agencies, then we have to figure out exactly how they're going to be funded, or we force the governor of Guam to be able to reorganize and restructure and realize some additional efficiencies. That's what we should do. Because, Madam Speaker, we heard from the Director of Revenue Tax. I know a while back there was a statement that if you give us one collection agent, that could literally translate, because of the additional workload being done, to an additional collection of maybe anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000 per collection agent. Well, yesterday we were told that they had between 5 and 8 additional collection agents. So have we even looked at that and said, okay, this is going to translate into additional collections? No, we're dismissing that. We're even dismissing the recognition and the report by the OPA that said approximately $40 million of outstanding land tax receivables remain to be uncollected. Okay, so someone's going to step in and say, I need to clarify that. There's maybe about $20 million that is offsets or credits. Okay, so $20 million outstanding tax receivables, but yet we want to sock it to our people. And let's say, let's keep operating this government business as usual, But let's take it off the backs of our people. Let's take it off the backs of our small businesses, because they're the ones that are going to be paying this. Everyone here, we're making $55,000 a year plus. So maybe we can afford to pay more if these tax increases are going to affect us. But is every individual out there making that amount of money? The answer is no. And we've taken a look at the labor statistics, and no, families out there are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, on the advent of opening of the school, guess what? They have to purchase school supplies, uniforms, and all these other necessities for their children so that they are prepared to go to school. And by the way, if a child asks a parent to please, Mom, Dad, can you buy me a Nike or an Adidas, sometimes the parents squint and they try to say no, but in the end, they get it because it's for their child. Even if it means the parent foregoing purchasing something for themselves. That's where we're at, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair. We're asking the people of Guam and the community and the small businesses to absorb some of these tax increases. Why don't we force additional aggressive collections? We even asked about the tax attorney, and I really appreciate John, Mr. Camacho, being upfront with us and saying they tried. We tried. Okay, you tried. And then what? So we just stop trying? Then we explore other options so that we can legally force these outstanding taxpayers to pay their obligation to this government so that we don't have to go to other taxpayers who are paying their taxes on time and ask them to remit more money, because the only people that are going to be paying these additional taxes are these people who are already paying it and they're meeting their obligation. They're the ones that are going to absorb the cost. The individuals and the businesses that are skating by for whatever reason, they're the ones that are going to take the tax breaks, if you want to consider it a tax break, because it really is a tax break or a tax reprieve, because they're not meeting their obligation. That's why it's critical that that particular arm of this government, Reverend Tax, hire a tax attorney, which has been in the books for 10, 15 plus years. That's where the legal arm comes in. Madam Chair, it really comes down again, like I said, collect the outstanding collectibles. We were told yesterday, and it was printed in today's paper, that approximately $73 million is outstanding tax collectibles. That's recognized as possible collections. So next year, 20 million of that is going to be recognized as uncollectible? No. If these individuals don't want to come in and enter into an agreement with the government of Guam to pay and to remit their obligation, then print their name in the media. Guess what? You're going to get 50% of them to come in and say, I'm paying this. Or if businesses are the ones that are not paying and they're not entering into a payment arrangement, yank their business license. I'm sorry, but everyone else is playing by the rules because they're paying their tax obligation and you're not. You have to be part of this partnership of not only carrying out and doing your obligation by paying your taxes, but you also have to be part of the solution. Don't be part of the problem and require that this government exert so much additional effort and resources to go after your tax dollar when you should have been paying all along.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
This is related to increasing the taxes.
Madam Chair.
And obviously we're discussing
point of order,
a tax increase.
Takes precedence.
Excuse me, what is your point of order?
The point
Please
of
state your
order,
point of order.
and I appreciate the passion that this good
What is
colleague-
your point of order?
It's not a passion, it's the truth.
Senators, what is your point? State your point of order. Please cite the rule.
The point of order is that we are on the amendment that addresses
He's
$1
speaking on the
million.
amendment, Senator. I'm allowing it.
He hasn't tied it in
Please
yet.
proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's what it really comes down to, Madam Chair. We keep emphasizing tax collections. 101 out of $190 million recognized as outstanding tax receivables. One of our colleagues alluded to $101 million that falls into a category of uncollectible. How can you still have that huge amount of money in a tax receivable as an outstanding tax collectible that is not collectible? Have you exerted every single effort? Have you taken them to the courts? Have you yanked their licenses? Madam Speaker, we are asking, like I said, and I will close with this, we are asking the people of Guam to give up some of their money. And whether we want to blame it on Uncle Sam and the tax reprieve, I understand it should have required belt tightening. But in the first 6 months of this fiscal year, plus the first 3 months of this fiscal year, plus the first 6 months of this calendar year, this government obligated the people of Guam in excess of $10 to $12 million of personnel hiring. And you know what's interesting, Madam Chair? This fiscal year 2018 budget has a hiring restriction, with the exception of critical positions. It has a hiring restriction. But you know, because people control the money, people can sign off on GG1s. You know what they're doing? They're signing off on it because they're not following the law. What we need to do is hold this administration to following the law and make sure that they only hire for critical positions so that we don't have to entertain amendments like this and ask the good paying taxpayer out there, individuals and businesses, to bear the burden of paying more to keep this government operating at its level. Let's collect our outstanding tax receivables. Let's recognize collectively, because this body recognizes it. I don't know if the administration does. Let's recognize collectively that yes, there's going to be a shortfall in cash, and let's act like there is by not committing any additional tax dollars to positions that are non-essential and that are not provided for in fiscal year 2018 budget. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Uggan. On the Speaker Cruz amendment that's before you, is there any other speaker? If not, then let's vote on this amendment. All in favor of Speaker Cruz's amendment, please raise your hand. Amendment fails. On the bill, Senator Nicholas. Senator Nicholas, would you yield to Speaker Cruz?
Did the motion fail?
Yes, that's.
I'm wondering, some people were wondering whether this is the 250 or the 1 million. Was it clear that the vote was on the my $1 million amendment?
If there's no objection, let's re-vote, and I'm going to make it very clear. We're voting on this amendment in front of us in writing without any amendments to it. The one in writing that's on your desk. All right, so this is the Speaker Cruz amendment. All in favor, please raise your hand. Yes, amendment passes. Thank you. Speaker Cruz, you still have the floor on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe somebody else has another revenue amendment. I just want to state that if we, there is 237 in the event that this should fail, but we'll deal with that. But let's deal with 323 right now, and I believe some other senators have some amendments on revenue generating.
All right. Okay, Senator Nicholas, you are recognized. Oh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, prior to addressing some of my amendments that I have here, I do need to ask, what is the revenue situation now that this recent amendment has passed? And
Yesterday was stated that with the passage of that, we would still have a shortfall of 5 million.
So now the shortfall is, what is the exact shortfall? Because my amendments were drafted prior to the passage of this most recent one, and so now I'm going to need to
All right, we're going to take 1 minute recess. Have your amendments been passed out?
Well, I'm going to have to adjust the figures based on what the
All right, he needs 1 minute, so we'll take a
new
1 minute
shortfall.
recess. Please have the amendments passed out. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if we can also request
We're at a 1 minute recess. Senators, I guess we'll come back in session. This, we're back in Committee of the Whole. It's going to take just a couple more minutes for OFB to give us the new figures. If there's no objection from the next speaker, I'd like to propose my amendments. Would that be all right, Senator?
Madam Chair, this is just that singular amendment for the 16,
yes, that's correct.
The amnesty. That's fine, Madam Chair. I'll yield.
Madam Vice Speaker, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been this is an amendment that was passed out maybe 2 days ago in the evening, and it's to take the balance of the tax amnesty money that is expected to be received by revenue tax on August 6th. And so my amendment says 16 million. I think the estimates yesterday were by the Director of Revenue Tax were close to that. So this would be just to put, the amendment strictly says that it's going, the 16 million of the General Fund Tax Amnesty Program proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 shall be used to pay for fiscal year 2019 obligations. So I haven't made any appropriation to offset this. This is just to help to balance the budget appropriations as they exist, including the 5 and the 1 of tax amnesty that's been allocated in a certain section of the bill. So that that would be on page 128 and 129. They specifically appropriate 5 million to GMH from the 2018 tax amnesty and 1,500,000 to the Department of Education for Simon Sanchez procurement. And so this is just to pretty much lockbox the rest of the 16 million that should be received on August 6th from tax amnesty money, Mr. Speaker. So that's my amendment. I urge my colleagues to support this. Thank you.
Any senator wish to be heard? Senators Nicholas, Ivan, Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the amendment and its intent. I just, I cannot support it. And the reason why is because I'm not confident that that money will actually be here. If the amnesty revenues are supposed to come in on August 6th, that's cash that's going to hit the bank now. And if that cash gets spent now, which this administration has been doing with all of this amnesty money, then this cash will not be there for the budget come October 1st. And while we may statutorily include it, if the bill doesn't get signed into law before the cash gets taken, and then the cash gets taken, and then the bill gets signed into law, we will have statutorily created a $16 million shortfall because the money would have already been spent. So I understand the intent of the amendment, but just looking at the timelines, even if we were to pass this bill today, which we wouldn't, even if we were to pass this bill today, the governor has 10 days to sign it. He can sit on it. The amnesty money can come in. He can spend all of it, and then he can sign it, and then we just created a $16 million hole. And to be quite frank, I'm pretty confident that's what's going to happen if we do this and if we rely on this $16 million figure as a funding source. It's just not going to be there. So I cannot in good conscience support the amendment because I know that we will end up having a $16 million hole right at the beginning of the fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ogden, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I certainly stand in support of this particular amendment. And just for the information of the community, this would, in August 6th, there's an anticipated approximately $16 million as a result of the tax amnesty program that will be collected, or at least that's the deadline for all of those who came in and took advantage of the tax amnesty program to forego the penalties and the interest due on their outstanding tax obligation, that by August 6th, the close of business, that an additional $16 million will be generated coming into this government. Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why I certainly stand in full endorsement of this, in light of recognizing that the total amount is approximately $32 million, $33 million, of which the other $16 million, we know, based on conversations during public hearings and discussions, at least I can surmise that has already been expended. If the argument is it was expended on paying our people their tax refunds, absolutely. That's an obligation that this government has. And using those proceeds to meet that obligation and pay our taxpayers or our people out there who are due tax refunds, then that would be sufficient justification. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I not only endorse this because we need to recognize that there was that additional $32 million generated in this fiscal year. And I have always been of the understanding, and unfortunately, the chief executive has the management discretion to be able to use resources where it's necessary. But we've seen that of the $16 million that has been collected, perhaps some has been allocated towards tax refunds, rightfully so. But unless this body authorizes some of those proceeds to go to GMH, we were told that an appropriation has to be made. Unless this body authorizes $1.5 million to go to DOE to initiate the process for the reconstruction of Simon Sanchez High School, then that money will not go in that direction. And that's what we were told. But I've always been under the impression and the understanding that any additional revenues above and beyond projected revenues should rightfully come to this body so that this body would allocate it accordingly, appropriate it accordingly. Unfortunately, that's not the way the system is working right now. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand in full support of this, recognizing, I know the previous speaker had alluded to it possibly being expended. What's unfortunate is that we did not hold this government of Guam, all-inclusive, the leadership to the $30+ million in overall reduction for this fiscal year. Because if it was mandated, then we would have the force of law to question it. But because it was not mandated, and we're basing our understanding that this government's cost or expenditures will be reduced by $30 million on an honest statement, honest understanding, I think it's very unfortunate because we've seen a lot of things that have taken place, whether it's raiding special funds or other activities that are not consistent with the law. And I alluded to hiring non-essential personnel that is not authorized in this fiscal year's budget. And I support this, Mr. Speaker, because rightfully so, I know that this body, I believe that this body should be the entity to authorize the appropriation and the expenditure of any additional revenues that will be generated by this government. And the tax amnesty revenues are additional revenues anticipated for the whole fiscal year above and beyond what was adopted through the Public Law 3487. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rodriguez. After Senator Rodriguez, Senator Morrison, then Senator Snogestein.
So I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chair, I rise in support as well of this amendment. However, with conditions that we amend it and specifically appropriate where the funds will be used. The speaker prior to Senator Uggan talked about a scenario that is absolutely correct, is that if we don't pass this budget with this amendment, the funds received on August 6th could be used at the direction of the governor. And so that's a scenario. However, if we prioritize and send that clear message from here, Mr. Speaker, that how that money is used, I believe we can avert how that money is spent prior to us passing it. if all of us here, and we've heard it over and over again, we even heard it last night in the congressional address, that the most important and a priority for us right now is the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. And us not losing a CMS certification, because if we do that, that is really disastrous for our hospital and our people. And so my support of this amendment, Mr. Speaker, would be to allow this provision, but with a condition on appropriating it to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority for a specific purpose of addressing the needs outlined in the CMS corrective action plan. I know that there is a provision here in this budget bill that you have, Mr. Speaker, that appropriates and allocates $5 million of tax amnesty funds for the hospital. However, the same scenario that Senator San Nicolas spoke about, that if we don't pass this this bill with these amendments intact, that those funds could be used for other purposes. And so I would ask if perhaps we can take a brief recess to work with the mover of this amendment to include an appropriation as part of this amendment.
Thank you. And yes, you can work with her to try to work on something. I want to hear what Senator Morrison and then Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Speaker, just on that point, I don't think we need to have a recess on that if it's just going to go towards increasing the general fund appropriation in the bill on page 29.
Okay.
Well, we'll see.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, I agree with the previous speaker. I mean, there's certainly not any assurances regarding this revenue stream for FY 2019. The amnesty program, in my understanding, was to cover the shortfall for 2018. And we are still in 2018. And there was no questions proffered to the panel yesterday, DOA. You know, we've been trying to get the tracking on that, but there was no also assurances what there will be left at the end of the fiscal year. There's still existing obligations that still need to be made. And Mr. Chair, I also think we're going to complicate future budgets. This is not a reoccurring revenue stream. This is really was to fast track and get receivables, get monies into the coffers to support the shortfalls of FY 2018. I think we're setting up this future budgets to be problematic. You know, we have to ensure that these revenue streams will be reoccurring and will support a sustainable budget. So I'm very concerned that we are jumping way ahead of ourselves and you know, start looking back on the intentions of why we all supported the amnesty program, was to cover the shortfalls of FY 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Morrison. Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A point of information.
You know, I support the intent of this amendment, but exactly as the good Senator Yamatic mentioned, the purpose of the tax amnesty was for 2018. To project it for 2019, come next week, even the Director of Revenue and Tax said yesterday they're tracking 12 to 13 million, so it's already 2 or 3 million less. I wish that earlier in the months when the tax amnesty was proposed, that we had passed a law to tell them that that money would be used for 2019. Then that's what I would have supported. But to do it now, as Senator Sinkers brought up, that money's gone. Come to 6, before even noon, that money's spent. It's going to go out on tax refunds. It's going to pay whatever they need to pay. I like the intent to save to pay obligations for 2019. But is it realistic? I don't believe it is. Thank you, Speaker.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Your point of information.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I believe with the adoption of Public Law 34-87, which was the adjustment of the BPT, there was commitment that that was sufficient to be able to cover the obligations of the government of Guam for the entire fiscal year. During the discussion of that proposal, and with representatives from the front office here, there were a lot of encouragement, urging, would you consider a tax amnesty? But not once did they confirm that they were going to proceed with that, Mr. Speaker. Not once. And then we had the passage of Public Law 34-87. About a month later, they stepped forward and they initiated a tax amnesty because your SES once again brought that up as an option to generate additional revenues. So those revenues should be viewed as above and beyond the commitment that was made by administration officials that with the reduction of the $30 million in the fiscal realignment plan, that 3487, what the revenues that would be generated as a result of that provision should be sufficient to carry through the obligations of this fiscal year. So, Mr. Speaker, that's why, in this case, to make the assertion that, in fact, is part of the fiscal year budgeted amount based on our conversations is an incorrect statement. It should be viewed as additional revenues to be utilized for government expenses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Estevez. Anybody after Senator Estevez? Senator, I'll take his question, his comment, and now your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understood it to be the same way. When we adopted 3487, it was a temporary BPT increase with a sunshine provision and a commitment of 30 million in reductions, which was supposed to balance us out and balance the budget for 2018. So I understand that the tax amnesty as well to be above and beyond. And while I do understand that maybe that money had to have been used in order to manage the cash flow of government, what really should still result in is an approximate surplus or supplemental or money available for supplemental appropriation somewhere equivalent to the tax amnesty. And so I don't believe that money was intended for 2018 unless they have expenses above the appropriations to be determined. But if all went according to plan as this body had adopted with 3487, then that money should be available for 2019 or for something before 2018 goes away with an appropriation. So that's my only comment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I believe Senator Camacho Torres had a question, then your comment, Senator Nelson, will be.
To the mover of the amendment, I just wanted to confirm that the amount of the proceeds that you're proposing to be used for from fiscal year 2018 for fiscal year 19 is still 16,000, or is it adjusted downward to cover just the balance of the amount that we're trying to make up, which I believe at this point is 5?
No, I think yesterday the director, John Camacho, told us he's actually estimating 18 million. I'm just putting 16 because that's what I had come up with before. But yeah, we could change it to the words the balance of, but I think we should put a set amount. So that's where the 16 came from, was the earlier estimates. And yesterday his estimate was 18 million.
No, I think you misunderstood. I meant the balance of, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to identify additional revenues to allow for the appropriations amount, the revenues amount to match the expenses in the budget. Yes. So what we were saying is, given all the different amendments that we have for Bill 323, we're still 5 million Correct. Short of balancing. So my question is I know what you're saying, but so you're saying that the revenues will be in excess of the appropriation levels?
That's correct. It would be it would be, if you take the 16 and you less the 6 that are already appropriated on pages 128 and 129, you end up with 10. So 5 of the 10 could be used to cover the shortfall right now, and 5 we could add to GMH, as Senator Rodriguez proposed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a question for OFB. Is this money even expected to be there? Because I'm asking this because we did do the fiscal realignment plan. They shut down fire stations. They shut down police precincts. They did whatever they could to save money in their best judgment, although I do not agree in the process that they took or the measures that they took. But the fiscal realignment plan did still commit the government to a $30 million cut to streamline. Now, my concern is with the tax amnesty is Mr. Carlson said that these agencies that were held to this $30 million cut, that everything was done on, in his words, the Honest Abe system. So they weren't really enforcing the implementation of realigning the government or ensuring that this $30 million plan was implemented. The $30 million cut within the government was implemented. So, and we saw the increases of hiring, which was very peculiar because we had no money. And so I'm wondering, are they taking these tax amnesty dollars, not following the provisions of the law, and perhaps there's some concern that that money is not there or will not be there anymore, as the good senator from Jigo mentioned?
Do you wish to address that? I believe there are concerns that have been stated by the senator from Dedido, the senator from Umatic, and the senator from Jigo, that there is a possibility that that money won't be there. We can't say from here, from the committee or from OFB, that it is going to be there. If you believe that it's going to be there, then that'll be your vote.
No, but in all truth, Mr. Speaker, I mean, is that money there, or are we pretending that it's there?
I'm not going to.
Because in either way, Mr. Speaker, this is a good amendment if the money is there. If there's something not that the body we're withholding, that the information that we're not aware of.
No, nobody's withholding any information. When we make the projections, we believe that the money's going to be there. The fact that we project BPT 30 million every 1% doesn't mean that it's going to happen. That's our projection. We project that, and you saw that in spite of all of our projections, we have 100 and whatever number, whether it's 73 or 190, that's not collected. We can only make the policy from here, and we'll vote however you believe that it's going to happen. Okay. But we can make the budget believing that it's there or not there.
So maybe I can ask a different question. It's now August. We are 1 month away at the end of the fiscal year. Did the governor and the agencies, through the direction of the governor, uphold the fiscal realignment plan? In tracking the money towards the end of this fiscal year, have we seen that they've upheld the reduction in $30 million through the fiscal realignment plan as we adopted through those special sessions that we went through earlier this year?
I can't say what the total number is because, as you put it, we're just on the first day of August, and so there's still 2 more months. Mm-hmm. But I know from what I've seen in the CRER, there are some cutbacks. You heard from the judiciary that they haven't received their full allotment. DOE hasn't received its allotment. Everybody has. I don't know. Some people have information that I don't have. That 10 or 12 million in GG1s have been signed over the last 6 months. Things are happening. You pointed out the other day that in spite of being in this fiscal crisis, an agency under your oversight hired 45 people. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, and I'm being criticized that, oops, I forgot to include them. I only did it with what I had in front of me. I'm not reading the newspaper to tell me that these things happen. So,
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of this amendment because I do believe that the Honest Abe system will be honest and act accordingly, that the fiscal realignment plan is being implemented, because it is the duty of our Magalahi to agree to the terms that we came forth by putting those taxes on the people, which of course I did not vote for. But I rise and support this amendment that this money should be appropriated and that they should not use this to continue the unnecessary hiring that they have been doing irresponsibly throughout the year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, may I raise a point of information? And I raise this, if OFB can contradict me if I'm incorrect in stating this, but the amnesty had 2 installments. We've already had 1 installment come in and it was spent. So there's already precedence for them spending this money. To answer the prior speaker, there's already precedence to them spending this money. So there's absolutely nothing stopping them from spending this August 6th money either. And you know, I know that there's some conversation, Mr. Chairman, about how this should be a supplemental appropriation. But if we recall, the revenue numbers that we adopted for this budget are based on a reduction in the FY 2018 projections. And that's because the FY 2018 projections aren't coming in at the amounts that we thought they were. And so the administration is able to use that differential to spend this amnesty money. Because they can say that we appropriated 254, we only brought in 249 on the BPT, so we're going to spend the 6. And so it's just, because there's already precedence on them spending the money and because the actuals are lower than the projections, there really is, I would love to say there's 16 million. There's just not likely going to be, Mr. Chair.
on the motion, anybody? Otherwise, the Vice Speaker will close. On the motion, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker. I acknowledge the concerns of my colleagues that, yes, they've actually been spending this amnesty money, and that there's a chance, if we don't pass this budget before August 6th, that they will have nothing urging them to hold it and use it for 2019. I'm urging my colleagues that we pass this budget before August 6th. We have on record the governor asking us for any source of revenue, anyone, and we did not have, if you recall, the legislature did not have a role in approving whether there would be a tax amnesty program or not. That was strictly an executive branch program. They decided on their own to waive penalties and interest to reduce the amount of collections that we would bring in. That was strictly their decision. And regardless of whether they've been spending the money that they've received or not, there's still some money that's coming in. It is still absolutely within our prerogative as a legislative branch to dictate where that money should go. And I think we should put it on the record, and that we shouldn't give up at this point. If our goal is to hold this government accountable, then this is one way to do that. Instead of washing our hands and saying, oh, they spent it, there's nothing we can do. This is something that we can do. And it was acknowledged by the Director of Administration when he was here. He said it's absolutely, he understands what we are trying to do with this and that he would respect that. That was my take on what his testimony was, and that it's absolutely within our authority to dictate where that money would go. I also think that this is an option to show the people of Guam that there is a choice. Instead of continuing to find other ways to raise $5 million by raising taxes, that we could use the money we are receiving when they decided to waive penalties and interest, we take that money and we use that instead. And I think this is what the call has been from the business community and others. It's why allow them to spend it on anything when we could dictate that they spend it on what we've outlined, what the speakers outlined here in the budget, and the balance to, $5 million to the hospital. And this is on top of, and we already have in the bill appropriations. So the arguments that, we can't dictate where the $16 million is going to go, it's the same argument that could be used against those appropriations on page 128 and 129. But I think we all just have to recognize, of course, they could ignore it. But I think this is the best way to put it on the record and to show the people of Guam that there is another funding source that they could be using instead of an increase in taxes. Thank you very much, colleagues and Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I believe that we're going to be voting on the amendment as was proffered. I've not seen any other amendment. So, have...
Mr. Chair, could I just ask for...
We'll take a short recess.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for your indulgence in the time. As I understand this, though the Vice Speaker is closed, there's an agreement to allow for an amendment. Is that correct, Madam Vice Speaker? Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I guess to make this work is to, instead of the 16 million that the Vice Speaker wants to set aside for 2019 obligations, we're going to have to deduct the 6.5 that you already have on page 128 and 129. And so that leaves the remaining 9.5 available for use. And so the way I'm proposing to use that additional 9.5 from this tax amnesty proceeds would be the 5 million to cover the remaining amount needed to balance this budget, the FY19.
I think we're getting into appropriating it now. What we need to do is her amendment to just get this amount into 19. Let's take the 9.5 if that's the desire of the body. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, only 5 million of that is what is needed for 2019. So my proposal would be the remaining 4.5 would go towards GMH. And so that would be the amendment. So instead of 16 million, it would be 9.5 million. 9.5 million, and that of that 9.5, 5 million shall be used to pay for fiscal year 2019 obligations, and the remaining 4.5 million shall be appropriated to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority for immediate use in 2018.
We'll take a short recess. This is going to take a little while. Let's recess until 2.